country's achievements. Page 571. $18.86. Part 5. The Republic under the Articles of Confederation and under the Constitution. Chapter 1. And these are what are covered in this chapter. The Return to Peace, Articles of Confederation, treaties with foreign countries, Indian nations, Northwest Territory, organized, a desire for a better union, a convention called the New Constitution. It is accepted by 11 states of 13. Close of the Continental Congress. The great struggle was over. Peace once more reigned throughout America. The army, which had so gallantly struggled on through every adversity, was disbanded, and the soldiers had returned to their homes to engage once more in cultivating the soil, or exercising the various industries which contribute to a country's wealth. Washington Washington, crowned with glory, regarded with admiration not only by his own country but in Europe, was in retirement at Mount Vernon, retaining none of the power he had so long wielded. There was much to do to enable the country to recover from the desolation of war. Among the curious anecdotes of the struggle, which now became public, one of the strangest was that of Deborah Sampson, a young woman of Plymouth, Massachusetts, who, disguised as a man, enlisted in the army in 1778. By her courage and fidelity, As a soldier, she gained the approbation of the officers and was always ready for the post of danger. She thus had many adventures and did not escape unharmed, having received several wounds. At last, a severe wound in the shoulder compelled her removal to a hospital where a brain fever set in, and she was soon supposed to be dead. It was then, for the first time, seen that she was a woman. The physician in charge took her to his house and gradually restored her to health. When she recovered, her commanding officer sent the young soldier to General Washington with a letter. The soldier feared that her secret had been discovered, and that the letter revealed it to the general-in-chief. When she presented the letter, she trembled as she had never done on the field of battle. Washington allowed her to retire while he read the letter. He then recalled her and, without a word, handed her a discharge form, the army, and a note containing some words of advice, and money enough to enable her to reach some place where she might make her home. The United States, as recognized by the Treaty of Peace, embraced 13 states. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, to which the District of Maine then belonged, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, which claimed Vermont, as New Hampshire did also, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, of which Kentucky formed part, North Carolina, which then included Tennessee, South Carolina, and Georgia, of which Alabama and Mississippi were then part. The Mississippi River was, except near the mouth, the western boundary separating the new republic from the Spanish territory of Louisiana on the west. It was separated on the north from the British province by the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence as far as St. Regis. From which a line ran east to the bounds of Maine. Florida was still held by England, though it was soon after restored to Spain. The country northwest of the Ohio was the great Indian country, the only whites being a few of the old French settlers. The country was governed by the Articles of Confederation ratified in 1781, all the powers being vested in Congress, composed of delegates chosen by the various state governments. The President of Congress was the virtual head of the Republic, the personal representative of the sovereignty of the Union, and the ceremonial of his household was regulated on that footing. These being days of great dignity in men holding high office. The President of Congress from the commencement were Peyton Randolph of Virginia, John Hancock of Massachusetts, Henry Laurens of South Carolina, John Jay of New York, Samuel Huntington of Connecticut, Thomas McKean of Delaware, John Hanson of Maryland, Elias Boydant of New Jersey, Thomas Mifflin of Pennsylvania, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia, Nathaniel Gorman of Massachusetts, Arthur St. Clair of Pennsylvania, and Cyrus Griffin of Virginia. But the government under the Articles of Confederation was found difficult. Congress could lay no tax or duty On all important points, it was necessary for a bill to have the votes of 9 states before it could pass, and then at least 2 members from each state were required to vote. The heavy debt contracted during the war was still unsettled, and Congress could not induce the states to pay their several portions. The army and the creditors of the government were clamorous for money. The question of new states was urgent. Kentucky and Tennessee wished to be admitted as states, denying the authority of Virginia and North Carolina. Vermont was ready to join Canada if she was not recognized as a state. Still, with all its weakness, the new government made some progress. It concluded treaties with France, Russia, and Morocco, regulating the currency by adopting the silver dollar of Spain as a standard, dividing it into 100 parts called cents, thus establishing what is known as the decimal system, much easier to calculate than the old pounds, shillings, and pence. A mint was established in 1786. The copper coin was struck. The greatest act of this period was the success of Congress in inducing the various states to give up all claim to the territory northwest of the Ohio, for which Congress, July 13, 1787, by a celebrated ordinance, established a regular government. The poverty of the country was great. The states urged by Congress, endeavored to raise means to pay off the army and other debts. The attempt to lay taxes caused great dissatisfaction. New England showed the greatest discontent. In December 1786, a body of insurgents in Massachusetts took the field to obtain a redress of grievances and were led by Daniel Shays, who had been a captain in the Continental Army. The governor of Massachusetts issued a proclamation calling on the insurgents to disband and urging the officers and citizens on the Commonwealth to suppress the treasonable work. But the insurgents stood firm and held several counties. Massachusetts then applied to Congress, which raised a little army of 1,340 men. But Massachusetts herself called out the militia, and General Lincoln, at their head, marched against Shays, who was threatening Springfield, then, as now, a great arsenal. It had hardly been occupied by part of the militia under General Shepherd before the insurgents attacked it. Lincoln acted with great energy and judgment, and without a battle and very slight skirmish, dispersed the insurgents and drove the leaders from the state. This, more perhaps than anything else, induced the states to yield to the advice of Congress, recommending a federal convention to prepare amendments to the Articles of Confederation. Virginia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Georgia, North Carolina, New York, Massachusetts, South Carolina, Connecticut, New Jersey, Maryland, and New Hampshire, in succession, appointed delegates to the convention. On Friday, the 25th of May, 29 delegates representing 9 states organized the convention at the State House in Philadelphia. George Washington, who was present as a delegate from Virginia, was at once appointed president of the convention. The delegates were in general men of the clearest mind and purest patriotism. All seemed to feel that it was necessary to remodel entirely the general government. On the 29th of May, Edward Randolph of Virginia laid before the convention a scheme embracing a national legislature in two houses, a national executive to be chosen by the legislature, and a judiciary. This scheme led to violent debates, the smallest states insisting on equal representation in both houses, while the larger states wished the representation to be in proportion to the population. The slave population was another difficulty. The small states wished whites only counted as population, while the larger states with many slaves wished all to be counted. The debates and discussion led to compromises on various points. At last, on the 6th of August, 1787, the committee appointed to embody the various points decided, reported not any amendment of the old articles, but a new constitution. This was put into shape by Governor Morris. By this constitution, the national legislature preserved the name of Congress to justify to justly honored in America. The upper house was to be called a Senate and composed of 2 members, elected from each state. The lower house was to be called the House of Representatives and be comprised of members elected by the people of the several states, each state to have 1 representative for every 40,000 inhabitants, or as it was finally made at Washington's suggestion, 30,000. A president was to be chosen every 4 years by electors elected by the people. Federal courts were to be established with the judiciary, and the powers of each branch of the government were laid down with remarkable clearness. The Constitution, as proposed by the convention, was then submitted to Congress to be laid before the states. By its terms, it provided that when ratified by 9 states, it should be put into force. When the new Constitution was made public, it aroused a strong feeling of opposition. There was much in it that excited alarm and seemed to menaced the liberty which had just been purchased by the greatest sacrifices. Able papers were written in favor of the Constitution and against it. A series of articles called the Federalists, written by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, earnestly supporting the Constitution, produced a great impression and are still regarded as the best exposition of the Constitution, and as such are used in colleges as a textbook. Gradually, the soundest patriots prevailed. Delaware adopted the Constitution in December. Her course was followed by more important states: Philadelphia, New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maryland, South Carolina, and New Hampshire. By the close of June 1788, all these states had ratified it, making the 9 required by the terms of the Constitution to establish it as the law of the land. These states did not, however, lie together. The 3 great states of New York, Virginia, and North Carolina broke the other states into 3 groups. Virginia and New Hampshire were strongly opposed to it, unless certain amendments were made. But as it was now necessary to accept or reject it, enter the Union, or set up an independent republic, they at last reluctantly joined the rest. Of the 13 states which had stood side by side from the commencement of the revolutionary struggle, 2 only, North Carolina and Rhode Island, stood aloof. North Carolina gave only a conditional approval, while Rhode Island would not even call a convention to consider it. The great work now before the country was to put the new scheme of government in operation. Preparations were at once made. Elections, in conformity with its provisions, for representatives chosen by the people directly, for senators chosen by the legislature of each state, and for presidential electors, all passed off with great harmony. The Continental Congress now closed its labors, leaving all great questions for the action of the new government. It had organized the Northwest Territory, which was governed by General St. Clair, who published a code of laws and wisely encouraged immigration and colonization. Under the impulse thus given, Marietta arose with settlements at the mouth of the Miami and Losantiville was started, where Cincinnati now so proudly rears her head. Western New York was rapidly filling up with immigrants from the eastern states. The Virginia immigrants in Kentucky felt that they needed a separate government and applied for admission as a state, while the people of Western Carolina, and what is now Tennessee, set up the state of Franklin, which North Carolina, however, soon suppressed. Such was the state of the country when the Continental Congress, having achieved its great work, the independence of America, dissolved of itself.